So welcome to our program. Sorry, I'm running a little bit late today. And I'm still having issues with the, as you can see, the webcam. But I guess it should be all right. So we've been looking at the Abhidharma, where the intentional cause is that we are deconstructing our experience. We're continually exposed to perceptions that seem to attain some sort of monolithic value. Like we'll see an object, and on the basis of seeing that object, we'll right away begin to conceptualize that in a solid way without really further inquiry. And of course, what we know is that the way that we choose to see things, we might be in a place where there's several things that we could see, but actually we choose to see a particular object. For example, if we're a doctor, we might be looking for hygienic aspects. If we're a body worker, we might be looking at people's postures. If we're in some way interested in one aspect of the, you could say, the landscape, that's the place that we begin to direct our attention. So we're both working with our, you could say, the faculty, and we're also working with our consciousness. Now, also the way that our faculty works, again, is influencing what we're seeing. So we might, for example, be Daltonian. We might have one condition or another that might change the particular perceptions. So all in all, we have various factors that constitute a singular impression. And why is this important? Because we think that we are seeing an objectively existing phenomenon, where in fact we are constructing it on the basis of our particular, you could say, optics. And that's where it's quite helpful for us to be aware of how we are actually operating with these three aspects that sort of that each possess 6 different faculties, if you like, namely the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. And that's also where these then have their corresponding fields, and they result in corresponding integrational functions. So that's why we're looking at that to identify that actually what appears to us is in fact a number of different conditions. And again, why is that important? Because this enables us to have a more clear understanding of what it is that we're seeing. And why is that interesting? Not really because we're, how do you say, trying to be philosophers or sort of necessarily looking into cognitive conditions, but because on the basis of that, this drives our sense of solidity, and we do what is called, and this I'm borrowing from Elizabeth Mattis Namgyal. Actually, other people use this word too. But what we do is we reify, we solidify things. So while we live in a living world, we actually, you could say, we deaden the world with the way that we actually solidify things. We fail to see the fluid, constructive nature of things. And so what we're in fact doing is we're trying to free up our perceptions and understand the living quality that they have, rather than us, you could say, jumping to conclusions, essentially exercising censorship. What we do with our life is we're continually exercising censorship. I want this to happen, and if that's not happening, then it's not okay. So we've already sort of set an agenda of how things should be. We experience things that we want, and then they should stay that way.
So, for example, presently I'm working with this camera, and I had counted on it being very sharp as it normally is. I don't know why it is, because I use this on Mondays, what do you call it, in the mornings, very often for the morning meditation, and then there's no problem. But for some reason here in these afternoons, it's just not doing what I wanted to. And so there's me who's sitting with a particular, my attention. Now, right now I'm looking at my desktop. There's a number of items on that desktop that's relevant to what I'm speaking about, right? But I'm actually choosing to focus on just the fact that my webcam is not working. So there's the interaction between my attitude that is sort of geared towards a particular agenda, the way that I'm using the faculty, and the object. So that's where already you could say, there's this triad of conditions that are taking place. There's my conscious attitude, there's the faculty that's engaging the object, and then there's the object. And on the basis of what I'm seeing on the screen, I'm not just seeing all of the screen, I'm only seeing the thing that I'm focusing on. And on the basis of that, I'm not just saying, this is not okay, this is bothering me that this thing, that this webcam is blurred. It's a bit like if you're maybe in a beautiful landscape, and then somebody has left a McFlurry, sort of a cup from McDonald's with some of these products that they sell people, right? These sort of sweet, sugary things, right? I think it's called a McFlurry. These sort of whip things up. I don't know. Anyway, these kind of things. It's sitting there. You may be standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, and there's somebody who left something from McDonald's there, and it's then the only thing that you're seeing, and you're working yourself into a major sort of rage over people littering, and in fact, you have like hundreds of square miles that you could look over. There's a beautiful vista, but you choose to fixate on that, and that's maybe the first sort of 10 minutes. Then you're sort of whinging about that, and it's sort of as you leave the Grand Canyon, it's maybe the only thing that you actually remember. So we fail actually to see the larger picture on the basis of this, and this drives. First of all, it drives first of all, we don't see what's actually there, but it also drives what we call our afflictions. That's where we fail to see the vastness. We fail to see the sort of larger picture, both of ourselves and of the landscape. But also, what it happens is it solidifies this toxic condition of self-centering. It increases our self-centering and let's say that we're with our family. Let's say we rented a big camper, what do you call, Winnebago. We rented a big Winnebago in Los Angeles, and we're sort of making our way down Highway 66, and we veer off to the Grand Canyon. But for the next 200 miles, you could be one of these sort of obsessive people that sit for the next 200 miles and sort of whinge to your family about people littering, Meanwhile, your family might have had a fantastic time in the Grand Canyon, and you're just going on about one thing. And the thing is, you're missing the vaster perspective, and also you're solidifying this toxic state of mind that perpetuates suffering for yourself and also for others. And from that point of view, then there's a certain, you could say, tragedy involved in this lacking of understanding how we're actually constructing monolithic narratives on the basis of what really is just a set of conditions. And this, of course, has to do with what we perceive, but it also has to do with memories. It could be us sitting in a beautiful place, and we're just thinking about something that happened. One of the funny things that happen is actually when people, they go to a fantastic restaurant, and they're tasting fantastic food, and then they'll go, that reminds me of the meal I had in Saint-Tropez or whatever, And then while they're sitting eating, they're talking about this meal that they had 2 years ago. That's kind of, and that's where, again, we have this sort of interaction between thought and the object of the thought, and then again, the way that we're sort of fixating on things. So that's where, if we begin to have this insight that we're trying to come across with the Abhidharma, then we begin to see that there's this triad of the capacity, the field, and the integrational function, meaning basically our consciousness, that then generates further, you could say, moments of consciousness. Now, Steven is going to be He's going to be talking about this. He gets a little bit mathematic. Oh gosh, sorry. I realize I forget that everything that's on my desktop is sitting up there. You know. So anyway, Steven, he gets a bit mathematical this, and that's probably where it's good that we have this thing up on the screen. You guys who are following this online, you can see all of this, I know. And somebody's saying, oh yeah, thank you. This is a hint to the rest of you guys. When I minimize the webcam photo, it appears so much clearer. Yeah, that's right. Okay, good, excellent. So we've looked last time at these 6 faculties, which is the eye, the ear, the tongue, body, and mind, right? So of course the first 5, they have to do with form, and the last one has to do with then essentially consciousness. So that's the capacity, right? That's our, it's called indriya in Sanskrit, and it is essentially Wangpo in Tibetan, and it is essentially what we could call faculties or senses. So then the field, that's the objects then, yeah. But Steven makes a point, it's a bit more than just an object, because there's more in a field. It's not just, you know, I can look at the webcam, but then there's also, you know, the people behind it, and there's the space and everything. So we're more talking about, you could say, a field. So that's where we talk about the middle column, and that's where we have the dhatus 7 through 12. So Steven says in the middle column, dhatus 7 to 12 takes the name field. We might say perceptual field, or more commonly objects of the senses, the objective or perceptual field. But remember, it also includes, as dhatu 12, non-sense-based objects, such as objects of cognition and emotion. So for example, memories, yeah, that's number 12. Steven uses this very sort of esoteric vocabulary there for dharmas. He calls it stuff. So that covers a lot of phenomena. These Sanskrit experts, they always have to, you know, show off, don't they? Huh? Stuff. So form. So forms here, this means shapes and colors. There is functional linkage between the capacity to process. There is a functional linkage between the capacity to process visual information called the eye and the visual perceptual field, which may be objectified. So that's where we look at something. There's a red carpet. If analyzed, this visual field consists of shape and color. More precisely, it consists of configuration and hues. So that is where we have this thing also, I believe, if I'm not wrong, Peter, correct me, which we call qualia, right? Where, for example, I look on that carpet and I perceive qualia. One day we're going to have Peter explain the mysteries around qualia, because where in the sort of the whole realm of, you could say, particles, does red actually figure? How is it that we perceive red when, in fact, if we analyze, there's nothing except a bunch of fields? Now, the thing is, Peter actually can explain this. So I'm just gonna have to request him to hold his horses, but we should one day have him explain this. So then similarly, we have the perceptual field linked to the ear, which is sounds, and then we have smell. This is the perceptual field for the nose. Then we have taste. This is the perceptual field for the tongue. And then we have touch, the perceptual field for touch. Finally, we have dhatu number 12. This is this esoteric phenomenon we call stuff. And this refers to dharmas, various non-sensory factors of existence, meaning they're not sensory in the sense of something that we can touch by our ordinary 5 senses. The field for mind as capacity to process non-sensory based information is not a perceptual field, which means then memories, emotions, and so forth. So as he says, therefore, dhatu 12 is the field of everything that might be processed that is not perceptual. We came up with the list of examples: memory, fear, and so forth. I call it stuff, lots of stuff. in this tradition, there is a list of 46 separate dharmas, energy packets that may be the target of processing. So this is also what we call the mental events. Now, Steven is fond of he's a bit like me. He's a little bit sort of pretending to be a little bit at home in the scientific field. So this, of course, he borrows, I think, from quantum physics or the notion of energy packets and so forth, or physics in general. And I guess it works. And the thing is also, when we have these 12 dhatus, they each actually come with its own potential. So you would say the way that we see things with our eyes, that's again dependent on the whole, you could say all the potential that's linked to the eyes, how well our eyes function, the way that we choose to settle on things, and similarly also with form. Again, we could have a whole field, but we choose particular aspects of it. And then the visual perception, again, on the basis of how our consciousness is, we might construct a particular perception in a particular way. You know, if we're, for example, if we look at a flower, then if you're a botanist, then you might have, you know, you'll right away volunteer the Latin name and you'll have all sorts of data. If you're somebody who grows flowers, then you'll know you'll have data around what it requires to grow particular flowers. And otherwise, you might just think, oh, that's a pretty flower. So, you know, the different conscious experiences, they all come with their own, you could say, energy packet, their own sense of potential. And that's why all of these we label as dhatus, which literally mean elements. Just like you could say we have the elements of, like we have the periodic table where we have, you know, 100 and however many elements. And similarly also within our particular perception with these faculties, their objects and the consciousnesses that emerge, we have these elements. So that's where we talk about these 18 dhatus. And of course, what Steven is wanting us to do is begin to break through, you could say, the deception of our normal, you could say, narrow perception, and should open up to understand that it's really just constructs. So just like if you know somebody really well, if you don't know somebody very well and somebody asks, what's this person like? Then you'll probably give a one-liner. Oh yeah, he's like this and that, she's like this and that. When you know somebody very well, you know, what's your spouse like? Oh, well, that's a long story, you know. So that's where it becomes complex the more you get closer. But it also means that you have a bigger mind. You're not falling into a little narrow judgment. You're actually remaining much more open. The more you know, the more you know it's difficult to make a singular judgment. So it actually dismantles our narrow judgmental mind the more we understand complexity of our perceptions. So Steven says, in each case, there is a strict horizontal correlation between column 1 and column 2. So that's where we have the faculty and the field. A specific linkage between the capacity to process and that which is processed, meaning the I and the form. According to the Abhidharma, you cannot see sounds. So, for example, yes, there's a direct linkage between I and form. There's not a linkage between I and, let's say, sound. So that's where we have the fact that we can't see sound. And of course, we might be artists, and then we might think, oh, I'm going to paint a soundscape, you know, and so on. That's fine. But if we get really accurate, that's not really what's happening. There's a consciousness that's, you could say, constructed on the basis of the visual, and it's on the basis of that conscious that we then sort of translate that into a sound. So you might have a composer that sort of makes a whole symphony on the basis of particular perceptions. So and so forth. So according to Abhidharma, you cannot see sounds, you cannot hear forms, and so forth. We can only see colors and forms, hear sounds, use the nose for smelling, and so on. How do we account for the experience that sometimes occurs when we have the impression of more than one channel at a time? The English term from this is synesthesia. Did I pronounce that correct?
Yes, synesthesia, or yeah.
Synesthesia, yeah. The Abhidharma answer is very simple. There is a rapid oscillation between the channels. So we might be thinking that we're seeing and hearing at the same time, but actually we're not. There's a rapid shift between the two consciousnesses, the two perceptions, which, because we don't have an open heart and a calm mind, we couldn't experience at the level that it was happening. And that applies for everything. I mean, we might not have a problem with this. If we're watching a movie, we might not actually find that distracting at all. Rather, it sort of plays into a sort of, you could say, a unified perception. But there is a place where we begin just to be more aware of what's going on. We would say that advanced meditators, they would actually perceive what we call momentary impermanence. We would say arhats, for example, they can see basically how things are crumbling at every moment, how everything is continuously changing. Of course, we could also say this could happen if just we drop some acid, or we somehow sort of actually hallucinating rather than seeing things sharply. I mean, while you're tripping, you might think, oh, I'm really seeing things truly for what they are. But then you might come out of it. It might just, then it's just left as a memory. Whereas with the sage, or someone who has this capacity of vipassana, that's actually not just that it's a passing state of mind that's induced by chemicals, but that's actually seeing things, you could say, just without normal habitual veils. So that's seeing clearly. So we've covered the first two columns. Then column 3, integrational function, and basically just what you could say our conscious experience on the basis of these senses and their objects. So column 3, awareness as integrational function of mind. According to this teaching on the integrational function of mind, in order to have a full moment of an experience called seeing, it is not sufficient only to have an intact functional capacity and a field that is waiting to be processed. So it's not enough that we just have an eye and we just have an object. We can think of an example where both are present, yet there will not arise the experience called seeing. Consider someone with an injury of the visual cortex. The visual cortex is located neither in the eye nor in the field that we're going to process. You could even make a test and show that information is coming in at the level of the eye, but they would not arrive at true support that the person is seeing something. Seeing has something to do with a higher integration that brings seeing into consciousness. So that's where then the faculty and the object are then processed. And that's where we talk about consciousness, or what he calls integrational function. And that, of course, all takes place within consciousness. So here, for example, if we talk about the 5 skandhas, then we would say all the perceived fields by the 5 senses, they belong to the skandha of form. But then you also have the skandhas of feeling, perception, impulse, and so on. And they, of course, add up to the way that we perceive things, but ultimately then the perception that results in a conscious experience then belongs to this 5th skandha that we call consciousness. Steven says, modern day materialists and those who follow neural net theories call this integrative factor the brain. But there are both philosophical and cognitive science disputes about the efficacy of this attribution. So again, this is complex. There's a room for discussion here, and we should have that sometime. We'll see about having that sometime. According to the Abhidharma and Buddhism, the elements of this 3rd column are not material things. They nevertheless name something that neither column 1 nor column 2 account for. So it's on the basis of this consciousness that we begin to have an object, and then a sense faculty that perceives this object, and then we begin to label it. But the labeling doesn't happen at the level of the object, nor at the level of the faculty. Of course, it's the consciousness that labels it. Santiago, that's it. So that's where it takes consciousness to actually finally process things, to objectify them. So that's where we would say the they nevertheless, meaning these integrational functions, they nevertheless name something that neither column 1 nor column 2 account for. It's not sufficient to simply have the field and the capacity that can process in order to have an experience. We also need an intact functioning third thing, the capacity to integrate, so as to bring it to consciousness. There are many examples of brain damage or psychological damage that might interrupt the arising of, for example, a moment of awareness of seeing, the interruption of the integrative functioning. We might call column 3 the integrative functioning. The Sanskrit term for this is vijnana, which often translated as consciousness. It means a way of knowing, which is divided, specific, or differentiated. It is differentiated according to the channel or mode that is operative. We could call it differentiated knowing or channel-specific knowing. And what Steven here, this of course, all we're talking about here are incredibly domestic, ordinary processes that are taking place every moment. So we might seem a little bit confusing that we're talking about it in terms of integrative functioning or differentiated knowing on channel-specific processing and all of that, because all we're just saying is just seeing something, hearing something, seeing, and tasting and so forth. But it's on the basis of then understanding you could say, the constructed nature of these. Again, coming back to the singular nature of each of these dhatus, that each of these dhatus, the I, the object of the I, the consciousness that generates this image that's on the basis of these two meeting, and so forth. All of these have their own little life, their own little potential. And that's why we all see things entirely differently. And it's on the basis then of deconstructing in this way that we begin to become more aware of what's happening. Otherwise, we're just stuck with a very one-sided perception. And the problem again is that this drives basically delusion and solidifies and reifies this sense of self and object.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Wouldn't we always be hijacked by memory? Because of that look like that, even from one's first being told this, that, and that generally. So there's this constant referring back to when I saw that in their circumstances. So how is that cut through and there's an open, clear perspective? Yeah.
So the question is, won't we always be hijacked, for example, of memories? Well, we are normally hijacked by memories, but it's when we begin to be aware of the constructions of a memory that we begin to see that is entirely being constructed right now. For example, my memory of something might be mixed up with the fact that I'm hungry. So if I think back on that, then because I'm hungry or tired, it magnifies a particular memory. The memory is taking place in the present moment. This is actually a really important point. When we're having a memory, we're thinking that happened to me, when I was 8. It didn't happen to us when we were 8. It's right now that we're thinking this happened to me when I'm 8. And on the basis of, you could say, our present disposition, then we say, oh my God, that happened to me when I was 8 years old. Because right now I'm tired, I'm stressed, and on the context of the different, you could say, the mind itself, which is influenced under the basis of our various sort of, first of all, our physical disposition, and whatever it might be, we might have worries. Then the present mind takes as its object, it's happening right now, a thought, which is me when I was 8 years old. And that's happening right now, but it's mixed in with this other dhatu that's full of all sorts of other things happening. So that is where the memory then is taken as an object, and then it's taken by the mind that's seeing it, and then judgment begins. And that's where that again as we know, we're rather hardwired. We could talk about brain plasticity. This is just purely in terms of, you could say, sort of a materialistic view. We can talk in terms of the hardwiring that basically regurgitates narratives over and over. And that's where the moment that we begin to be aware of the conditioning that's taking place in this moment, then we could begin to relinquish the belief, because it's only the moment that we believe in these thoughts that they actually attain the solidity. And that's where they then get traction and we perpetuate them. Once we begin to understand the science of the dhatus, which is that this is made up of these, you could say these three, in this case it's mind, the mind that's, the functioning consciousness, stuff, which is then, let's say, memory, I was 8, and then the present consciousness, which is then what is generated on the basis of that. And we then subscribe to it on the basis of all the different conditions. Then it develops into a particular picture. And it's there that we then begin to fixate on that. So that's where, with the knowledge that we are presenting here, we know that it's a construct. And then if we take this to the practice of meditation, we can say, well, knowing that it's a construct, I'm going to acknowledge that it arises in the present moment. And then I'm just going to let it be. I'm not going to carry on. I'm not going to, you could say, fixate on this. I'm not going to perpetuate, you could say, the drama or the memory or the mood or whatever it might be. I'm just going to be aware that it's there, and then I come back to the breath. And that's where we discontinue this ordinary fixation on our thoughts as being solid. They're taking place right now. So this is hugely linked up to meditation. That's why when we're meditating, when we say thoughts arise and we don't follow after the thoughts, some people might say, oh yeah, in meditation, we're not supposed to have thoughts. Well, there's no such a thing as supposed to. We have what we have. There's no stand for what's supposed to be happening. But what we are doing, which is radical, we're not perpetuating it. So that's where we say, oh yeah, I remember this thing, my dad was dreadful to me, or my dad was incredibly sweet to me, or whatever it is. We just, oh yeah, that's a thought. We let it go. We just come back to the breath. It's allowed to be there. But just like clouds in space, they eventually dissolve. Sonsung Rinpoche, he'll make a point though. He'll say, even though we wanted to fixate on it, we can't. It'll go away. Of course, what we're doing is we're putting down seeds that will come back again, but we can't actually hold on to it. So that's where we might be horrified at the content of our mind, but in fact, we needn't be, because they go. What we can do, and what we often do, and what we regularly do, and that's how we, so you could say, we hardwire ourselves, is that we fixate on it, and then eventually we get distracted. We fall asleep, or there's something on TV, or somebody calls us, or we get distracted and go on to something else. But we've laid down seeds, vasanas, on our storehouse consciousness. So then it comes up at a later point. But what we're doing here with this analysis is beginning to understand that what in fact seems to be a solid thing as a memory, and what in fact hijacks us again and again, in fact is just a scarecrow. It appears as something, but if we analyze, where is Mr. Crow? There's the straw, there's a hat, there's a sleeves and a jacket and some stinky old pants. There's nothing there. So that's where we're trying to get to the bottom of this, to seeing the hoax. Yeah, Steven?
So in that case, how does learning happen?
Oh, learning is memory.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and memory is a great faculty. Of course, we have the capacity to memorize, but there's memory that will, you could say, drive toxicity, and memory that will set us free. So you can sit there and you can memorize the former president of a particular nation that remains unnamed, and you can sit and ponder that for a while, and then you can think of Mahatma Gandhi for a while and see the difference, Or you can read a passage from American Psycho, or you can read a passage from Abhidharma text, and you can memorize the two, and you can see what they do to you. Yeah.
So memory itself has both positive and negative.
Absolutely, yeah. All of this, of course, is relative, and you could also say, the perceptions that we have. We can again look at one object, the photo, You know, you can look at a photo of the aforementioned former so-and-so, but then again, you can look at a picture of the Dalai Lama. And that constitutes just a perception, but they have very different impacts on our consciousness. Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. Someone said, would it be possible to please explain the case of Helen Keller, who didn't have the direct correlation between the senses and the sense objects? Oh, what's the story about Helen Keller again?
Yeah, blind, deaf, and dumb.
All right.
So basically, she was taught through a sense of touch, and then she created a whole world.
Okay.
Creating senses, internal senses.
Okay. Well, Stephen was actually answering that. You know, it's the same. For example, blind people, do they dream colors? Right? So that's why he was saying this is the capacity. There was a bit in the beginning, in the section on capacity and on the eye. Then he said this is really just talking about the human disposition. Doesn't necessarily link up with the particular physical eye. So, for example, in the dreams, we'll have perceptions of various kinds. Yeah. So similarly, we can assume this is what was the basis for Helen Keller's art. I'm wondering about how then it is possible to perceive vibratory reality. For example, hearing sound is not equitable to hearing the vibration of forms.
It's a different level of vibration. There's a visual vibration, which is translated to color. Auditory vibration is a longer wavelength, which is translated incorrectly to ear to sound.
Okay.
They're both vibrations, but just different wavelengths. So
the answer here from the Department of Physics in Berkeley is that the difference lies in the vibrations.
The length, the amplitude, or the frequency of the vibrations.
So the frequency of the vibrations.
It's about 20 hertz to about 16,000 hertz for auditory, and much higher frequency for visual phenomena.
Okay,
it's all electromagnetic radiation.
Okay.
It's all the same spectrum.
All right. So for the auditory perception, it's 16 to 20,000 hertz, and then visual higher.
It's 20 to 16,000.
Oh, 20 to 16,000.
It's a little bit less. But anyway, the point is that it's a different order of wavelength, and the longer wavelengths are auditory and the shorter.
Okay.
And that's why the senses we have are designed to interact with those wavelengths and then translate that into.
I'm going to give you an email, then you can. Anyway, difference in the wavelengths. Yeah. Okay.
There's one more thing that I thought would be helpful for people is that the hippocampus is the seat of emotional reactions, and in order for a memory to go from short term to long term, you have to turn on the hippocampus. So you have to have an emotional charge of one kind or another to store something in long-term memory, either a strong positive emotion or a strong negative emotion, then activates that to store it.
So what memory is activated by the hippocampus, and the short-term memory and the long-term memory.
In order to move it from short-term to long-term.
So to move from short-term memory to long-term memory, there has to be an initial.
There has to be some kind of emotional component in order to integrate that.
So there has to be a strong emotional component for that to actually kick in in the hippocampus. Okay.
And the other thing about memory retrieval is when you retrieve a memory, it's destroyed. And in order to reestablish it, you actually have to create it again. So that's why over time, our memories tend to change in the direction that we are interested in sort of retaining. So that's.
Okay, yeah. So yes, the moment that we bring out memory, they're actually destroyed, and so at that point, what we're actually is recreating. That's what we're saying.
Yeah.
Basically, in Buddhism, also the moments. So basically, we would say they're like a string on a rosary, where it's just one. They're not. They look like there's one continuity, but in fact, they're instants, right?
And unless you pull it up, it's more fades.
Yeah.
So over time, if you're someone who stops being self-referential, all the self-referential memories kind of fade out, and they don't start to, they interrupt your current time less and less because they become weaker and weaker. Synaptically, they're not strengthened by bringing up for review.
Okay, so unless we bring up things again and again, then actually these memories, they fade on their own account. But of course, if we do bring them up, then they continue to take place, but they're not actually, they're changing all the time, right? Yeah.
So meditation would be.
Last time we remembered it.
Yeah, that's right. But what you're remembering is when you bring something to mind, and then you end up having to restore that freshly.
Yes.
It's not as though there's like a.
That's to really remember.
Yeah.
I suppose the aspect of meditation is that we're constantly just noticing the thoughts, but then you're not refraining and just allowing to be like a wave and come and go.
Mm-hmm.
And fixation comes with this sort of, you know.
Yeah, that's where the practice makes that
But
less.
that's where that will start helping dilute old stories and.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I apologize to the online audience that you're missing out on some of the discussion here, but I think we have more or less covered the ground here, what's basically being discussed. Then someone says, the question arises due to, the questions arise due to the comment that regarding subject and object, horizontal relationships in the columns. Oh yeah. So you would say I is necessarily corresponds to form and so forth, and you're saying that it could correspond to sound if we're talking about vibrations and wavelength. I suppose so, but generally just on a regular, you could say pedestrian immediate experience, there is then correlation between I and form. Can we say that? Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, the apparatus of the sensing is engineered or calibrated for that. So you're not going to pick up the higher frequencies with the ear, for instance. You're not going to pick up the lower frequencies with the photoreceptor.
Okay, so as far as these frequencies go, they are actually calibrated. So for example, you're not going to see sound, but they are calibrated so that the sound will correspond to the ear and the form will correspond to the eye. Yeah, okay, good. And then someone's saying, interesting discussions, thanks. You can hear it quite well. Oh, good on you guys. You're coming through. Excellent. Okay. All right. So this is interesting, huh?
People say American voices carry.
No. Who says that?
To a fault.
So visual perception refers to the eye vijnana, meaning the integrative function of knowing along the specific channel that is activated through contact with the capacity to process visual information and the presence of forms to process. In short, we might call this the integrative capacity for seeing, the channel-specific process based on the eye. Channel-specific processing with the eye as its basis indicates the integrative aspect that is necessary in addition to the presence of the eye and the form. This integrative function would be compared to the visual cortex. So basically just how we can describe the act of seeing with these different, essentially these three columns. Yeah. So review of the three columns. Column 1. Just going to do something here. No. All right. Okay. Column 1. The capacity to process sensory information. We have something called I. Without that, we could not see. I here means the capacity to process experiences. Now notice also, and coming back to Helen Keller then, we're just talking about the capacity to process particular, you could say, visual perception. So we could talk about I, but in the case of someone who then doesn't have the intact faculty, then still there is the experience of a visual seeing. So I here means the capacity to process experiences. Older translations seem to call this column 1 items organs, but that is misleading. For Vasubandhu reminds us that they do not refer to the organic, anatomical, physical aspect of the so-called organ, but rather to its capacity to process specific kinds of sensory information. Same thing when we're dreaming also, where we see, we hear things and so on, with our eyes closed and so on. Column 2, the field or domains of what there is to process, to see and so on, the stuff to process. So, the objects. Column 3, the integrative function of channel-specific processing, which is dependent on columns 1 and 2 working well. So that's what we have. So, Dhatu shorthand, the language of processing. Remember, the only reason we're doing this analysis is because of the question of how we can concretely experience the difference between a moment of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching on the one hand, and anything else on the other hand. So again, that's if we're, for example, going back and forth. What is it? Synesthesia? Yeah. Then, in fact, it is just oscillating between different consciousnesses. It is said that for one moment of a full experience, called the moment of seeing, there have to be 3 intact factors that are synchronized and working together. Okay, and this is where this gets, yeah. So we'll see now. We have to have these 3 factors, which are then the columns represented in columns 1, 2, and 3. This is the analysis according to the dhatus. And remember also, these dhatus, they're not seen as just singular. The eye, the form, the visual perception in these cases, they each hold, you could say, potential. So they're all, they're not fixed in one particular way. They're all aggregations. So this is the analysis according to the dhatus. And so I have developed a bit of a dhatu shorthand in order to become a bit bilingual, to speak the language of processing reality in this way. Okay, don't worry about this. This is not as bad as it looks. For example, we can note a moment of seeing as eye, form, visual perception, right? That's 3 columns. Yeah, we're good with that, right? Moment 1. So that's where we then have moment 1, okay? So the number outside, the right-hand square bracket 1, indicates that there has been one moment of visual processing, which itself consists of the 3 dhatus. So again, let's just see here. I'll move this a little bit. Okay. So remember, these dhatus, they have numbers, right? So in case of the eye, we have 1, we have 7, and we have 13, right? So that's what he's using here. And then he's going to do a slash and a 1, meaning moment 1, okay? Here would then be Dhatu's analysis schematic of 3 moments of experience. Moment 1 is the moment of seeing, channel 1, and moments 2 and 3 are thinking about that which was seen, right? So we see something. We see something, that's this one, the 1 here, right? It's followed by the object, which is 7, and then the visual perception, which is the 13. That's Dhatus 1, 7, and 13, right? And they're taking place in one moment. So that's 1. So that's the first one here, right? Now, then there is, I just saw a beautiful flower. Then I think, flower, you know, and then I start waxing poetic about it. And that's where I then sort of go, there's my mind, and then there's the object, which is the perception I just had of this flower, which is then coming back to what we call stuff. And then I begin to sort of wax lyrical and poetic about it. And that's then where I have this consciousness, this mental experience. So that's the second moment. So we have 6, 12, and 18 happening in number 2. And then finally, as I sort of dwell on this, then I'm also still thinking about it in moment 3. Again, 6, 12, and 18 in 3. Now, I'd like to make a disclaimer. I would like to say, I'm very fond of Steven. And so whatever Steven does, I think is just wonderful. This is Steven Goodman, by the way. I'm also very fond of Steven Teller, by the way. But but some of you might go, oh no, what's this supposed to? This looks like math and this is scary stuff. But don't worry, this is not too scary, really. This is as scary as it gets, and it's not that bad. So Dhatus 1, 7, and 13 are connected with dashes to indicate that they are actually functioning together. So we have this moment 1, which actually is happening with 1, 7, and 13, right? The name given to these the name given to these dashes between 1, 7, and 13 is contact or rapport. So that's just how they're stuck together. I'll just see what the note says. 101, sparsha. Oh yeah. Actually, Kapu last time, it's interesting having Kapu here because she actually has a pretty good grasp of Sanskrit. So, so anyway, she was confirming that. That's Tibetan is rekpa, and it's essentially just touch, yeah, or rapport, contact. It is said that in order for there to be any moment of seeing, all coordinated aspects have to have contact. There has to be the capacity, there has to be the field, and there has to be the conscious processing. So that's where we need all three aspects. And if any of them is damaged or absent, there will not arise an experience called seeing. This applies to any of the 6 channels, which are named based on the numbering of the capacities. Okay, so that's where we then have this yeah. So that's these 18 then each have their numbers. Let's see, there's a question here. Actually, this is good. You can all see the question there. I'm sorry for we can't blow it up more than we can presently. Yeah? Some of you might. Jack, can you see what's up there?
It's blurry anyway.
Yeah. Yes. It might be. Damien, can you see?
I can't read the smaller text
Yeah.
in the question, but I can see the.
You can see the rest.
The text, sure.
Okay, cool. Okay, great. Yeah. So the question is, hold on. There's a question here. So what happens, for instance, under the influence of drugs? We hear colors and see music. Well, that again, that is where we actually become more attentive. It depends really what kind of drugs you're doing. But, you know, there is sometimes an incredibly insightful clarity that emerges with certain psychotropics that you would think, wow, I'm really seeing the truth about things now, you know. And that's where, in fact, we're just a bit clear on things. But then again, the thing is, when that chemical wears off, we don't have it anymore. So then it's just a memory or whatever. And that's where it's very different from actually seeing properly. It's chemically induced, it's conditional. But the thing is, when we talk about hearing colors, seeing music, particularly if we're an artist, then we of course are operating with consciousness. So we regardless of whether we're on drugs or not, it's very easy to actually see something and then to have some, you could say, association with it in terms of well, you know, you could see something, a color, and you could hear music, but some people, they actually also would associate it with weekdays. You know, it's the oddest thing. We've done all sorts of experiments with perception and how you actually associate it in terms of you see a particular color and you have particular taste. So, I mean, they just happen. They're associations that essentially go back to the 3rd column, which is conscious processing. And then I love this mathematical depiction of the dhatus. Makes it very clear. Okay, well, that's because you're an academic. Anyway, good. It's for everybody, even the academics, they're allowed. Yeah, Damien?
I'm just curious with so if you have a 1, 7, 13 experience, and then it moves on the next moment to a 6, 12, and 18.
Yeah.
And in relation to a flower, if it is an edible flower, and you have a memory of eating that flower, so you're in the 6th.
Yeah.
But then you have a physiological response. You start salivating, and your stomach starts gurgling because you really like that edible flower. So are you actually having a 4, 10, 16?
Yeah, well, that's actually the question before. Yeah, it's true. No, that's interesting. Well, you're not having a 4, but you're having probably a 16 of some sort, you know. So that's where the person before was asking about how we can hear colors, you know. So yes, there's essentially associations. Yeah.
You don't need all 3 necessarily.
Well, you will have 3 because it might be that there's an initial consciousness of flower. You're aware of the flower. So those 3 need to be there, and then it moves on. Then it moves on to, on the basis of what you have perceived on the basis of the first two columns. Then the third one, the column 3, might go into 16 gustatory perceptions or whatever. But you can see this is interesting because you're already now developing, you're already becoming a Abhidharmika. You're already beginning to see how this actually goes back and forth. So you're already becoming aware of actually how this experience of, I see a flower and now I want to eat, you know, you're becoming increasingly aware of what's actually driving you and what's happening. So yeah, it's rubbing off. Good. This is a capping. You're a natural. So yes. So this shorthand actually names the capacity in Jaya, the first one, for processing as the first number. The second number names the object, the alambana. Should be in italics, I think. That's 102. Mikpa. Oh yeah, that basically, Mikpa just means, yeah, the object, the reference point. Yeah. And the third number in the brackets names the integrative function, Vijnana. What do we say there? Yeah, Namshe, which just means knowing a particular object. So Vi is actually specific, and then Jnana is the knowing. In Tibetan is Nam, means an object, and then knowing it. So that's also why we, yeah, never mind. So thus, a moment of seeing can be noted as 1713. We've talked about here. Just now you can start talking to your friends like that. You know, you go to an exhibition and you just say, "Oh, wonderful 1713 experience with, you know, Monet." That's right. You can have coffee on your own. Thus, a moment of seeing can be noted as 1713, and a moment of hearing can be noted as 2814. The act of seeing is a firing of channel 1, and it means that there is contact among these three functionally working dhatus. But the thing is also, it's not just about us going all weird and becoming incredibly nerdy about things, but it's actually that we begin to be less deceived. And that's where, for example, we might say, "Oh, I hate this sound." But then we're actually becoming aware that, yes, there's something out there. There's maybe, you know, somebody with, what is it again, the nails on the chalkboard or whatever, you know, that kind of thing. But we become sensitive. And there's actually a place where we're not necessarily that sort of driven by it. Maybe that's an extreme example. But, you know, you could have something where you're just, you know, somebody is maybe seeing a Monet and they're just like, they can't stand Monet, you know. And you realize what's actually functioning is sort of memories, and the fact that they're saying they don't like it is that they're fixating on something particular. It's a construct on the basis of several, you could say, compartments and packets that actually constitute this particular experience. So just saying, "I don't like this," is actually a lot more complex than appears. And so that's where we could say, well, you know, maybe you should go and have a coffee with me, and, you know, they'll lighten up. Or, you know, it may be, you know, this was in Monet's, you know, dark days or whatever, you know, he was, or, you know, he couldn't get away from that garden with all those damn lilies and stuff like that, you know. Yes?
So are all these moments, like 1713, are they all always followed by 6, 12, 18 moments? Because each time you have some kind of perception, there is some kind of mental processing.
I think in the first moment, yes. But like we were saying before, I think we possibly could talk about having something in the second moments that might also include, for example, association. So, for example, on the basis of seeing something, we might have a sort of an association that drives us towards wanting to eat something gustatory, right? So I think we can talk about that. It's an interesting question. He hasn't actually addressed it here, but it sounds like this is something we need to take into consideration, that it sort of skips across. Not in the first moment necessarily, but possibly in the second and third moments. Because it's in the second and third moments that then you could say the narrative of the consciousness begins actually to veil over the actual perception and takes over the actual, you could say, picture that we generate in our consciousness. Yeah.
So would the sage just have the initial moment 11713 without it being followed? Or?
Possibly, yes. Or being very aware of how they operate. And basically, you would just say the sage would see things without getting entangled in all the particular consciousness is what sparks these sort of like regurgitations and the sort of the ongoing fixation on perceptions, right? And conscious thought, yeah? So that's where meditation, even without being a sage, even us sitting here meditating, we actually begin to free ourselves from that particular pattern, yeah?
I love that thing in Brilliant Moon where that old man's talking about Durga Kansarinche, and if someone went to him with a story of how something was really dreadful and all the rest of it, and he'd go, I see. And someone would come and say this, oh, wonderful, do it. And he'd go, I see.
It's not true, actually.
I love
It's true, actually, yeah.
This complete sort of equanimity with the warmth and being present with it.
Yeah.
But with technology.
That's true. Rinpoche actually, he would listen to people, and he was Kampa, right? So sometimes Kampas, they just grunt. So you tell them something, they just grunt. But he had a very sweet way of grunting, and just go, so very kindly. Okay, I guess we'll leave it at this point, and we'll continue from there next time. Okay. If there's some last question. Okay, hold on. There's a few questions. Yeah. We filter and select when we perceive. This is done from mind consciousness. Yes, that's true. But the point here also is that the first dhatus, numbers in the first case with the visual, 1 and 7, they also come with, you could say, packets of information that they actually are part of the final experience of mind consciousness. Yeah. So there's a question: are we ever in the present, or is it every experience just a memory? Well, that's interesting. You would actually have philosophers like A.N. Whitehead, who would actually say we never actually have anything present, but it's only in the next moment when we have a memory of what was the present that we then experience the present. That's A.N. Whitehead. But and he's huge, actually, incredible philosopher. But we would actually, in the Buddhist context, we would say, regardless of what our perception might be, we might be working on those parameters. We are in the present, and that's the reality of things. That is, you could say, the nature of things. So it is, regardless of whether we are getting caught up in a memory or whether we are thinking about the future, it is all taking place within this the timeless nature of what we call present, because we cannot find a present and we cannot find a past. Nobody has ever experienced the past. Nobody has ever experienced the future. This is all taking place in a completely ungraspable, intangible presence, right? So keep that in mind, and then drop some of these interesting chemicals that you can get out in your neighborhood. But yes, we're honing in on dismantling some assumptions here, and that's where the notion of understanding how things are actually taking place, free from the ordinary assumptions, such as memory, such as the solidity of a past and a future, and so on. So that's what we'd like to get at. But that's also why we're talking about how this perception, and we're merely talking about perception, takes place in terms of all these conditions that then take place in the present moment. And that also provides actually for a fair bit of empowerment, because we're not necessarily driven to fixate on it. That's also where we're suggested to actually begin to see through a particular hoax that drives us. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, but even in the moment 11713, they don't really happen at the same time, even if it's very, very short, like milliseconds. there's no real presence. There's no real, like what you actually analyzing with your number 13. It's not exactly what is now. It's what was now when you actually saw it with your number 1, right? So there's always a gap. So there's no real.
Well, this is.
You don't actually see what you see.
This is both in Buddhist and also Western epistemology. This is a sort of a famous fact that yes, the first moment is actually never really perceived because it happens without any perception, and it's only on the basis of once it's happened that we're developing the conscious idea. It's actually been preceded by, you could say, naked perception. We are only having, you could say, a regurgitation of some sort. Again, this is something where it would be, this is a big topic, you know, and but at this time is up, so bring it up first thing next time. We can make sure Peter's here. Okay. Would it also not be possible that there is no defined order when it comes to contact, so that perception which labels may actually influence which capacity used in the processing of field? That's an interesting thought. I think presently we're operating on the assumption that we do have first a particular object that then provokes the second and third columns. Again, bring this up next time. We can look at that. But I think presently we're operating with the assumption that there is a sequence, column 1, 2, and 3. In our daily life, 6, 12, and 18 must be far more busier than other channels. That's right. That's right. Mind you, it's not necessarily a given, because sometimes these things also are what we see. We're not conscious of them, you see. You know, we're seeing a lot of things, but we might not notice it. So there's, you could say, a lot of unconscious perceptions. But in general, in particular, us then who meditate and are aware of the workings of the mind, we should certainly be on to 6, 12, and 18. Yeah. All right. Hope this is helpful. Okay. Do I have a dedication here? No. Okay. Right. Okay. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of sun, may all beings be. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but flourish ever more and more. Okay, we'll just have a 2-minute break, and then I'll say something about meditation. And then today, we're going to be doing what we actually have always done. Actually, it's true. This has been going, what we have here has actually been going on for 12 years, you know? And just the last year with the COVID and everything being online, it just seemed odd to do it many times just on my own. So it just seemed odd to sort of do the 50-minute meditation. So I've sort of held it to just being 15. But we'll be back to actually doing a session of practice, which then consists of, we'll do 20 minutes of sitting. Actually, no, because we do have a liturgy that we're doing now. We're going to do 15 minutes of sitting, 5 minutes of walking, and then 15 minutes of sitting again. I think that works beautifully, because we do a liturgy at the beginning, and also we do some chants at the end. So it'll add up to 50 minutes anyway. So 2-minute break, and then I'll do some talk on meditation, and then we'll do some practice. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. I'll convey your thanks to the live audience. Our friends here thanking the live audience here for your input and comments.
This is
Jakob, do you know how many people are joining in?
I can find out. Hold on. Steven, I think actually we can cut the projector at this point. I don't think we need the projector anymore.
From here on in, tonight.
Yeah. So if you can, just back down the projector.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay. Actually, I'll do it. Okay. So just to say a few things about practice of meditation. The general gist of how confusion and suffering happens from the Buddhist point of view is essentially our lack of being present and us being caught up in what we've just been looking at here on the basis of our perceptions, physically, externally, or internally, thoughts that arise. We fixate and we essentially get caught up in a chain of thoughts. And what happens when we're thinking is that there are actually objects of our thoughts. Like we have memories, I think about my childhood friend and how we always used to get into fights, and how he would cheat and how he would, be dreadful, or how I was a dreadful person and I regret how I treated my friend. All these things, all of a sudden we're absorbed by our thoughts. Now, on the basis of our thoughts, then, we generate a solidified sense of self. So on one hand, there's a place where we solidify the object as existing in a way that it actually doesn't. It's really just the way that we solidify and reify, make it real. And similarly, also, we do the same thing with ourselves then. So there's the object that becomes solid, and there's the self that becomes solid. And we're continually operating with this subject and object that we are then solidifying. Instead of leaving it all in an open space. We're actually retreating into a version of space that has nothing to do with the, you can say, the object, and likewise also the one that is observing phenomena becomes toxic. And of course we see this in ourselves and we see it in the world around us, and this is what we bemoan. We bemoan when people become small-minded, for example, and we rejoice when people are big-minded, when people are sort of easygoing, when they're like, oh yeah, well, you take it, you know, it's okay, I don't need it, please, you know. We appreciate generosity, easygoing, kindness. We feel uncomfortable with uptightness and you can say nervousness and stinginess, miserliness, aggression, and all these things. So we have a natural instinct that actually tells us something's gone terribly awry, something's gone wrong here. And it's actually from the basis of us solidifying the object in a way that doesn't exist and basically generating a toxic subject. And what we're doing with the practice of meditation is actually stepping out of this, you could say, entanglement with regards to our perceptions. So that's why meditation is never something of going into a particular zone. But what we're doing with meditation is actually opening up to reality without the normal, you could say, toxicity. Our world as such is not necessarily toxic. It's us who are bringing toxicity to it. Of course, we could say, well, I'm not the only one. So that's true. There's a lot of toxicity going around, but it doesn't really, we can't really blame nature as such. So the issue here at hand is, rather than you could say think that there's a solid reality out there that we need to escape from, what we actually want to do is begin to lessen the way that we interact in a toxic way. The old Indian sage Shantideva had a beautiful way of presenting this. And again, I'm thinking of Elizabeth Mattis Namgyal, who was just talking about this the other day. And she was quoting Shantideva, who says, we might want to have a comfortable world. That's how we operate, right? We want to have a comfortable world. People are supposed to do what we like them to, and they're supposed to not bother us, and they're supposed to be nice. And if they don't, what are they doing? You know, we're bothered. And it's as if we don't expect it. It's sort of like, what are they doing? They're bothering me, you know? But the reality is that we can't really ever expect the world to be gentle in that way. It would be like wanting to have the whole world covered in soft leather. Let's say we walk barefoot and we hate that we're constantly bumping our feet against things, walking on thorny items, and we're uncomfortable because we're where we put our feet. We say, oh, wouldn't it be nice if the whole world was sort of covered in leather? And that's where Shantideva says, well, you know, you could obtain the same effect by just covering your own foot. So that's where it's not about the object as such. We would actually be able to withstand any situation if we have the leather of, you could say, open-mindedness, open heart, lack of aggression, lack of, you could say, self-centered agendas in general. Then we could interact with anything. That's where we could actually, probably we would be a bit, you know, it wouldn't really be a world. It would be a very dull world if it really was covered with leather. And it would be a very dull world if everything just went according to our particular, you could say, expectation. Actually, I've said this before, Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, he wants to find hell as actually a place where we never get challenged. That's one way of hell, actually, that everything just goes exactly like we would want it. We would actually spiral off into a completely, as you can say, ultimate ego, what we would call Rudra, ultimate ego, if there was never anything that actually snapped us into the sanity of having to relate to other, if everything just was continually just one big cotton candy experience. So that's where we can appreciate this fact that we actually should rather relate to becoming, we should attempt to be sane rather than try to have the circumstances change according to our wishes. So that's where, when we are looking at the Abhidharma analysis here, that we're beginning to become aware of how much we're actually imposing and we're actually not experiencing fully. And that's where we're actually opening up to this wider perspective. And that is what is implicit in what we call vipassana. But for us to have vipassana, of course, here I was joking continuously about we could drop a tab of acid and then we would sort of become more aware. But the thing is, again, that would be chemically induced. And of course, as anything, that whenever we introduce something on the basis of conditioning, then we become more addicted to it. Not necessarily chemically addicted. I remember back in the day, everyone would say, well, the acid is out of the system in about 2 minutes. And, but the psychological addiction, yeah, the psychological addiction is actually such that we actually, the more we need impetus, artificial, you could say, something that brings us there, the more actually we have less natural capacity. And that's where it's almost proportionate with the high that we have a corresponding low, and less of an ability to do it without the you could say the artificial stimulant. And that's where, of course, in meditation, we're never ever making ourselves dependent. We're promoting autonomy, that naturally we would just see through these assumptions. We needn't have something actually come in and do it artificially. We just need to look. That's all. We just need to look into our perceptions and see they're actually constructed on the basis of subject, the form, and the conscious perception of it. So in that sense, there's already, just by looking, there's already a dismantling of the reason for toxicity. Just by keeping this, you could say, openness, then we're getting free of the ordinary narrow way that we try to diminish ourselves. Just connecting to our reality. We're connecting to ourselves, we're connecting to the reality around us without needing to introduce anything. So much as meditation looks as if we're doing something artificial, it's actually the moment where we're no longer doing anything artificial. We're the outcome of the sage, the meditator, emerges as what we call a rishi, somebody who's straightforward, somebody who's sane, somebody who's just reliable, honest, and at ease. And so that's the whole purpose of the entire project of meditation, of spirituality, is really just to become at ease in reality. That's the awakening that we're sort of aiming at towards with the practice of meditation. So we're just essentially allowing for sanity to break through. So of course the practice of meditation looks as if we're doing something incredibly introvert or not connecting at all, but it's really just allowing, you could say this, if we have a glass of water with lots of particles in it, if it's agitated, it's murky. If we settle it, it just becomes clear. And what we're doing with the practice of meditation is just allowing ourselves to become clear. So whatever we're doing in the Buddhist path is really just to allowing ourselves, or creating the conditions for this clarity, for this dismantling of confusion. So in terms of meditation, then we sit and we adopt a posture that's straight. And it's not so much that we're trying to look uptight or necessarily particularly yogic, but it's more just that if the nadis are straight, then we would say the prana is straight. If the prana is straight, then we would say bindu is straight. And this would mean the mind is clear. So basically just providing the ideal conditions. We might not be used to sitting on the floor, and even though many of us do sit on the floor, there comes a time when it just might be a bit uncomfortable, and then it's completely fine to take a chair. Hence we have chairs. They're intended, you can put wherever, you can put your chair wherever you like. Now the only thing is, when we do the walking meditation, we're going to create a little corridor around the edge. So those of you who are sitting back there with Mahita and Rodrigo, and we just put the cushions up on the carpets, the red areas here. So then we'll just walk in a circle. So this is like we used to do it down at the yoga studio. And then when we sit down again, just take the cushions back. But that's the only thing, you'll have to move your cushions. I hope that's okay. But basically, when we're sitting, then we're providing an environment, a physical environment or a physical framework of calm, which allows for the mind to be calm. So, of course, if we can meditate at all times and be completely, you could say, sane, and you could say undiluted and unconfused when we're moving around, that's great, and we should. but at the same time, acknowledging that we're only human, it's quite helpful to actually provide the ideal conditions of sitting. And by the way, if ever you want, we do sitting in the morning from 7 to 8. We chant the Heart Sutra, the Prajnaparamita Sutra, quite briefly in the beginning, but then we sit for 20 minutes. And then there's the practice that we do here with the Buddha sadhana. At that time, afterwards, we chant the mantra for a while. But anyway, this practice of, if you want to join in with some other people on Zoom, it's available. Just ask Steven, he'll provide all the necessary material. Just putting it all on Steven.
I can send you a link.
Yeah, exactly. So just to let you know, every morning at 7, if you want to join in, there's a group there. I don't know, we're like 15 people, something like that. 12, 15?
It depends.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's 15, sometimes it's 20 something.
Okay. Yeah, depending on the weather, depending on what's on TV.
I don't know. That's up in the morning.
The breakfast edition. Anyway, this practice of sitting, very helpful. So the first aspect is the posture, straight spine, taking the shoulders back, the chin in a little bit, the gaze lowered, relaxing the jaw, hands on the knees or in the lap, whatever is convenient. Main thing really is that we commit to just giving ourselves a break and actually sensing our physicality. So it's not about escaping our body or going into a realm of the mind, or the body is evil and the mind is sublime and all of that. It's really just the body is extremely blessed. It's a wonderful thing that we have the body. So we don't need to get out of it. We don't. I think Frank Zappa had a word for it. It was discorporate. Discorporate. I think it was one of the early albums. He had a song called Discorporate. Discorporate and free your mind. No, it's not like that. We actually free our mind through connecting with the body. And so on the basis of that, we then have the second aspect, which is connecting the mind to being present. So where we normally drift with whatever thoughts come by, and we normally are sort of distracted, and then we just come back to something that's very simple, direct, and non-conceptual, which is just the breath. And here particularly we focus on the out breath, just as the breath exits, and just allow ourselves to exit with the breath, relax into space, and then allow a gap while the in-breath happens. And again, you could say be slightly proactive in being attentive to the out-breath as it exits. By the way, please feel free. There's a little, just around the corner there, on the second shelf, I think there's a little folder called The Practice of Meditation. It's just one page, but it's such a beautiful teaching. So it's sitting there. Feel free to take if you want. Yeah, it essentially summarizes what I'm saying here, but in a much more elegant way. And it's very brief and to the point. The last aspect is then the mind. And that's where we normally get all entangled in our thinking. And we're not at war with the thoughts. But the point is, we needn't actually tag along with them. The thoughts are kind of like inviting us. They're kind of like saying, hey, come on, I'm an interesting narrative. And we very often regurgitate these familiar narratives. And some of them obviously are painful and sort of neurotic and driven by memories and traumas and sort of things that have left an imprint on us. And we keep coming back to it. And they're surprisingly repetitive. But they also, the problem is that they actually drive this, so you could say, deluded condition where we sort of freeze or go into a sense of me, and then the object of what happened. Again, we can analyze this with the dhatus. There's a thought, there's the particular capacity of the mind that engages it, and then there's the awareness of it that then we can perpetuate. So that's where we do have the faculty, the object, and the consciousness that arises from it. Columns 1, 2, and 3. They happen as we are thinking. So that's where we needn't get engaged or entangled in that. We're not talking about suppressing it or doing away with it, but we're talking about not necessarily giving it traction. We sometimes in psychology we would say, you go for the bait. There's very often that it comes from somebody else, but it can also come from ourselves, and we just go for it, and then we sort of just tag along until we realize And of course, we do this. And so when we're meditating and we discover that we've been distracted, it's not like we have to throw in the towel and say, oh my God, now I'm useless at meditating. I was wanting to go into sort of a sublime state. And here I am just thinking about, the argument I had with, my neighbor. So that's where we needn't think that we're hopeless meditators. That's completely normal because we've been doing that since a very long time. So it's predictable. Of course, we'd like an instant fix, but I'm afraid we're stuck with being who we are rather than who we would like to be. And who we would like to be, again, is a very unrealistic assumption and expectation. So we should just be friends with the good old person that we are. And we are possibly mindless. We are possibly hopeless meditators. And so what? We gradually, providing the right conditions, begin to be less of a hopeless meditator. And it's essentially making friends with who we are. And that's where there's a non-aggressive sort of, you could say, spirit in this, where yes, we discover that we were distracted, we come back, no need to embellish further. So in that sense, we discontinue or stop this ordinary chain of just being lost in thought. That's where meditation is very helpful. So we do this in conjunction with this practice of Buddha Anusmriti, recollecting the Buddha, which sets the atmosphere. And then on the basis of invoking the Buddha, and then at the end, then dissolving the reference point to the Buddha as external, we then settle into just the simplicity of meditation. And so we'll do that. I'll leave for those of you who are following online, I'll leave the camera on here. Those who hear, I hope you don't mind this, just a camera, but this, I think that's all right. A very benign little audience. I don't think they're working for the NSA or anything, so it should be okay. And then we'll do the practice of meditation, and then at the end we'll conclude. So we'll do the chanting of the Buddha practice, then we'll do 15 minutes of sitting, 5 minutes of walking, and again 15 minutes of sitting, and then we'll conclude. Okay. Okay. Okay, thank you for that information. Send me the link if there is. Yeah. All right. Cool. Yeah. Okay. Okay, let's just arrange things a bit. Okay. Yeah. Okay, cool. Excellent. Maybe just the last. Is this good? Oh, it's right. Yeah. Perfect. Perfect. All right. Yeah, excellent. That works. We're going to cool. All right. How's the aircon? Is it too cold?
So,
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Oh,
No.
We could open the windows. Should we could open the windows? Yeah. Let some fresh air. Uh-huh. Cool. Thanks. All right. So you all have the text on. Excellent. Okay. Let's see. Okay. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the sacred happiness devoid of suffering. And may they dwell in boundless equanimity that is free from attachment and aversion. As the union of unborn emptiness and the ceaseless appearances of interdependence, magically there appears before me in the sky, amidst vast clouds of offerings, on a jewel-lined throne, a lotus sun and moon disk seats, the incomparable teacher, lion of the Shakyas. His body the color of gold, adorned with major and minor marks. Clad in the 3 Dharma robes, he sits in Vajra posture. His right hand gracefully poised in the earth-touching mudra, and his left hand in the gesture of meditation, holding an alms bowl full of nectar. Like a mountain of gold, magnificent he shines in splendor, spreading beams of wisdom light across the whole expanse of space. The 8 close suns, 16 elders and the like, a vast ocean-like retinue of noble beings encircles him all around. Simply think of him and he grants the glory of the highest bliss, liberation from samsara and nirvana, the 2 extremes. He is the great being, perfect embodiment of every source of refuge. With your great compassion, you embraced this turbulent and degenerate world and made 500 mighty aspirations. You are as exalted as the white lotus. Whoever hears your name shall never return to samsara. Most compassionate teacher, to you I pay homage. All my own and others' virtues of body, speech, and mind, together with all our possessions, visualized like Samantabhadras offering clouds, I offer to you. All the harmful actions and transgressions I have committed throughout beginningless time, each and every one I now confess with intense and heartfelt regret. Noble ones and ordinary beings, accumulated throughout the past, present, and future, I rejoice. Turn the wheel of the profound and vast Dharma teachings ceaselessly and in every direction, I pray. Your wisdom body is like space and remains changeless throughout past, present, and future. Yet in the perception of those to be guided, you go through the display of birth and death. Even so, let your form body continue always to appear. Through all the virtues I have accumulated in the past, am accumulating now, and will accumulate in the future, all beings who are as infinite as space, may you, the sovereign of Dharma, be forever pleased, and may all attain the state of the victorious one, the Lord of Dharma. Living beings like us, adrift in this degenerate age, have no guidance nor protection. Because of your kindness, caring for us with surpassing compassion, every manifestation in this world now of the 3 jewels is your enlightened activity. You are then our only refuge, incomparable, supreme. So from our hearts we pray with total confidence and faith. Do not neglect the great promises you made in times gone by, but hold us until we attain enlightenment with your compassion. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Te yatao muni muni mahamunaya soha. Te yatao muni muni mahamunaya soha. Te yatao muni muni mahamunaya soha. Te yatao muni muni mahamunaya Te yatao muni muni mahamunaya soha. Te yatao muni muni mahamunaya soha. Om muni muni mahamunaya soha. Om muni muni mahamunaya soha. Om muni mahamunaya soha. Om muni mahamunaya soha. Om Muni Muni Mahamunaya Soha. From the Buddha's body there emanates a great radiance, a multicolored rays of wisdom light, dispelling all our own and others' obscurations, and causing all the qualities of the Mahayana path to arise within us, so that we attain the perfection, from which we will never return again to samsara. So still on the same page. The miraculous display of the unsurpassable wisdom appears as the intentions, deeds, prayers, knowledge, love, and ability of all the Sugatas and their children become like them. So then the aspiration prayer of the trail. I prostrate to all the Buddhas and to the Bodhisattvas, endowed with the divine eye of the sages, and to the Shravakas as well. I prostrate to Bodhicitta, which counteracts birth in all lower realms, perfectly shows the path to the higher realms, and leads to no aging nor death. Whatever negative actions I have done, under the influence of an afflicted mind, in the presence of the Buddhas, I fully acknowledge them all. By the accumulation of any merit I have created, through the three kinds of activities, may my seed of omniscience grow, and may I attain awakening that never ends. No offerings to the Buddhas that can be found in realms of the 10 directions are known to the Buddhas who rejoice in them. I rejoice in all these offerings. I fully acknowledge all negative actions and rejoice in all merit. I prostrate to all the Buddhas. May I attain supreme primordial wisdom. I earnestly request the Bodhisattvas who reside on the 10 directions to awaken into supreme enlightenment. Once you have awakened into genuine enlightenment, tamed the maras and the hordes, may you turn the wheel of Dharma, so that all living beings may be healed. With the sound of the great Dharma drum, may you free all sentient beings who are suffering. Throughout millions of kalpas, may you remain and teach the Dharma. Mired in the swamp of desire, entangled in the strands of cyclic existence, I am fettered by all that binds. I supplicate those supreme among humans to look upon me. The Buddhas do not blame sentient beings who are flawed. With a loving heart for all sentient beings, may the Buddhas free them from the ocean of cyclic existence. Any perfect Buddhas who are present, those who have passed away, those yet to come, may I train following in their way and engage in enlightened conduct. Having perfected the 6 paramitas, may I liberate the 6 families of sentient beings. Having actualized the 6 extraordinary faculties, may I reach unexcelled enlightenment. Future phenomena are not born, and those past will not occur. Present phenomena have no inherent nature. There is no actual location. There is no perception. There are no outer things. May I realize the Dharmadhatu of emptiness. According to the Buddhas, the great sages, there are no truly existent sentient beings, no life force. There is no truly existent individual and no nurturing of a self. May I realize the Dharmata where the self is not present. An entity such as grasping onto a self and mind is not present within any of the paramitas. To benefit all sentient beings, may I give with generosity, free of avarice. Since things do not exist as entities, may my wealth appear spontaneously. Since all things totally disintegrate, may I perfect the paramita of generosity. Endowed with a flawless ethics that is guided by rules, and an ethics that is completely pure. With an ethics free of an arrogant mind, may I perfect the paramita of ethics. Just as the elements of earth, water, fire, and wind, bodhisattvas do not remain caught by mental constructs. By attaining patience, anger never arises. May I perfect the paramita of patience. Through the power of previous perseverance, and become stable, enthusiastic, and free of laziness. And through a strong body and mind, may I perfect the paramita of perseverance. Through the samadhi where all is illusion like, through the samadhi of the hero's stride, and through the samadhi that is like a bhadra, may I perfect the paramita of metaphysic concentration. Through actualizing the 3 gates of full liberation, the equal nature of the 3 times, and the 3 types of knowing as well, may I perfect the paramita of prajna. Through persevering in a bodhisattva's practice, may I attain the kaya praised by all the Buddhas, the luminous kaya and the kaya blazing with majesty. Thus may my intention be fulfilled. May I be like the famed Maitreya, who engaged in such a practice, perfected the paramitas, and perfectly abides at the zenith of the 10th level. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be free. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. May the Buddha appear in this world. May the light of the teaching shine like the sun. May the holders of the teaching live in harmony, and thus may all be auspicious for the teaching to endure. We pray for the good health of the teachers. We pray for their precious lives to be long. We pray for their activities to spread and increase. May we be blessed never to part from the teachers. Agashasya stiti yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuya jagatukani nataha. Agashasya stiti yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuya jagatukani nataha. Tavan mama stiti bhuya jagadukani nignata. Tavan mama stiti bhuya jagadukani nignata. As long as space remains, as long as the world remains, may I too remain to alleviate the sufferings of the world. Thank you.
Thank you.